So what I'm going to be covering today is how to lay FlexTrack and assemble it in curves, and the same thing applies for straights as well. So I'm going to be adding a section of track to my layout where I was replacing a damaged section that got stepped on by the horses. I'm going to be taking these two sections of rail here and turning it into a section of FlexTrack. I don't have 6-foot rails. This is all I have. These are just scraps that I've weathered. And so this is actually about a 3-foot section of rail, but the principle and all the practices are exactly the same. I've already laid the road bed, and the way I do that is I go around ahead of time and stake out the center of where my track will be going. What I use is wooden stakes. They're the small ones you can get at Home Depot. And I go about every 4 feet, or just a little under, because I use a 4-foot level with a grade scale on it, and I pound in a wooden stake. You can see one right here, and this is what I use to determine the center line of my track on my layout as well as the elevation. So you can see from here we're going to pick up on the end of this track. We're going to bend these two rails, slide the flex ties on them, and then proceed around the corner. So on these flex ties, these are micro-engineering flex ties. These particular ones are code 250. You'll notice that there's two short tabs on one end and a relief in here, and this is designed to hold the rail joiner once you get the track assembled. On the other end, you have a longer tab, which is designed to meet up with another section of that and keep the spacing of the ties correctly. So as you're assembling these onto the track, you want to make sure you alternate them back and forth between this end and this end, which is not relieved out for the rail joiners. And so it works both ways. So the two small ones join up and keep the tie spacing correct. The other thing you want to watch out for on these, and it has to do with the molding process. So in the molding process, these little flashing pieces will tend to bend over like that. What you want to do before you put a flex tie on is go through and just push them out of the way, and that makes it much easier to get the rail through there. So in order to prep the ends of the rails, you want to make sure there's a bevel on this edge, and you can do that with a wire brush on a bench grinder or a file. And since we're outdoors today, I'm going to do it with a file. Just put a little bit of a bevel on there. I want to go on that corner, flip it over to the other corner. This is on the base of the rail. And then I'm going to do the top edge here and the top edge there. And what that does, it allows the rail to slide underneath the spikes that are molded into the tie strips. So these two rails now have to be bent to match the curve of this road work here, the rock. And so what we're going to do is take each rail and we're going to create a bend in it using the rail bender. Okay, so this is a Sunset Valley Railroad rail bender. It's got one drive roller on the bottom here, and you'll notice that there's a profile on this roller. The profile is designed to fit the code 250 rail, and these have been modified to also do code 215. It takes a different roller to do code 332. They're a little wider on top here. Now the way this works is the foot of the rail is on the outside here, so it goes in just like that. This is the foot of the rail. Now if you back this lower roller down, you can see I can just slide it right through and it's not bending anything. Now when I tighten this up, the lower roller comes up, and if you get to a certain point as you run this through, it'll start putting a bend in the rail. Right now I have it set very low. And so we're going to bend this rail. We're going to do a test bend. So I'm going to crank it up to about on this first mark here. And you can put your own marks on here because there is no scale to go by. It's strictly by you bend it and you go lay it in place and see how close it is. If you happen to go too much of a bend, you can bend it the other direction and straighten it back out again, so you're not losing any rail. So I've got this set on my first notch up here. Let's go ahead and bend this piece and we'll take it back and measure it and see how it looks on the curve itself. And as you can see, it's got a little bit of a bend in it. And I can tell right now this would not be enough. So I'm going to go ahead and make another bend a little more. So we'll just adjust this up just a little bit more, run through again. And it's still not quite enough, so it's experimental. You just kind of keep guessing at it, and eventually it'll work out right, and then you'll have kind of a feel for where you need to be at. Okay, so now we'll take this back over and we're going to check it with our road bed. Okay, so this is the rail we just bent, and you can see it follows the road bed pretty nicely. It'll continue on around the curve there. Now we got to go bend the inner rail, which is going to be bent just a little bit more because it is a 2-inch smaller radius than the outer one. So we'll go bend that now. And so what I'm going to do on this is I'm going to back this off again because I don't want to overbend it. So we're going to go back maybe a couple degrees on the knob there. And we'll go ahead and bend this one. Alright. So now we've bent the inner rail, and as you can see it matches fairly close to the outer one. It doesn't have to be perfect. As long as you get a general curve in the direction you want to go, it'll be fine. So what we're going to do now is take these two rails, and I'll show you how we put the tie strips on. So these are the two rails that we just got done bending. This is the outer rail and this is the inner rail. These two will end up joining up with the section that was already on the ground over there. Now these will have rail joiners on them, so the end of the tie, I want to make sure the relief is in there for the rail joiners. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by putting one flex tie on this end. We're just going to feed it right through until we get about there. And we'll put the other rail in. Right about there. So now we're going to take this end of the track down to the edge of the workbench, and what we're going to do is we're going to clamp this down to the workbench. And what that'll do is it'll hold the rails in place and it makes it easier to work on. So now remember, the tie that went on there first has the release at the far end so we can put our rail joiners on there. And so the next tie strip we put on has got to go this direction. So now we're going to start sliding ties on, and you just start feeding the rail through. You've got both rails to feed now, so you've got to kind of coax them a little bit. And if you start pushing, you'll see how the ties push together there. It'll start binding up on you. And so you kind of got to feed them through gently. You don't want to pull too hard because then you'll break the little spike heads off. Okay, so now I've got one section out of there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move it. Especially important to take one to about center. What that does is allows you a place to hold it, and it keeps these rails real stiff while you're trying to feed them. Otherwise they're going to be bouncing around on you. Now on a 6-foot rail, you're going to be out here about 3 foot, and it's really important to get a tie in the middle so when you're working out here on a 6-foot rail it's much easier to work with. Indentation's right there, and so the next tie has got to be going with that facing it, and that gives us our correct tie spacing. So we're going to come back down at this end and we're going to start feeding the next tie on. Move that one towards the center, and then we're going to take this one all the way to the end. And then we're going to bring this one, and we're going to take this one over and put it, now we're sort of in the middle. So now the next one's got to have a long tab because the other long tab is right there on that side, and so we're going to come up and match it. So then we're going to slide the next one on. It's easier if you use your fingers like a comb and help guide each of the ties, and that way they don't bind up quite as much. Alright, so we're going to slide that one on down. With a little practice, you'll get real good at it. So now we got the indentation again, so now we got another indentation here, so we're going to go that direction. Alright, so now we're on our last tie strip, and you can see if I put on a full one, because this long one has to be at this end, we're going to be over where we need to be for the track length. And so what we're going to do is we need to have these two reliefs here for the rail joiners. So we're going to back up and take this with a pair of wire cutters and make our tie shorter. Now this piece, don't throw it away because we can use it for another section of track. So now we'll go ahead and put this last piece on. Alright, so now we're going to trim the end of this rail off because, as you know, when two rails start out the same length and you bend them in a curve, the inner rail is going to become longer than the outer one, so they all have to be trimmed square. So I have a little jig here that I just draw a line across, and I try to come out about a 1/2 inch. Mark it. Now this can be cut with a standard razor saw that you can get at any hobby shop. It can be cut with a fine tooth hacksaw if you happen to have one. But I'm going to go cut this on a bandsaw, electric bandsaw, and then I'll be right back. So now we're going to be putting the rail joiners on before we actually take it over and put it in place. So they just slip on like so. And what I try to do is pull the tie back down a little bit so that the rail joiner is sitting in that relief, and then you can adjust all these along the way. So we're going to pin this right here and here so that during the heat and cool of the day, as the rail expands and contracts, the rail doesn't get pulled out of the rail joiners. So the way we're going to drill these holes is first we're going to center punch them so that we have a hole, mark to drill by, and it's going to go right there on the foot of the rail on the rail joiner, and then on this side, same place. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take a 047 drill bit and we're going to drill down through the rail joiner, the foot of the rail, and the plastic that's underneath it. So now that I've drilled the holes, I usually have this car follow me around because I'm going to be using it again when we fasten this to the rail that's currently on my layout. I'm going to take these little tiny pins and I'm just going to drop it right through the foot of the rail. Sometimes you got to coax them a little bit. So now that rail joiner will not come off. Okay, so now we have a 3-foot section of flex track with a pre-bent curve into it. So now we're going to go ahead and put this on the layout and fasten it to the other rail joiners at the other end. Alright, so now we're going to join this up to the last piece of track. So I already have the rail joiners on this one. And we'll just come over here and we'll work these in. Sometimes it takes a little coaxing. The rail joiners are a little stiff sometimes. And closing right up there. And you can see now we have another section of track that's complete, and it's right on the center line of my wooden stake here that I talked about earlier. Now what we'll do next is we'll pin this rail joiner on both sides of the on each rail, so there'd be 4 pins here and there, and that's how you do flex track.